We are right at 2:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. And for all those who've joined, if you can, please try to put your name in the chat so that I can get a general attendance of who was able to attend the workshop today. As I mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. I'm going to make the recording and presentation available on the CORPO webpage, the dedicated funds page after this today. So if you want to continue to reference it, that'll be available. I am going to run through the presentation and then there'll be time for questions or comments at the end. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll either address them as we go if it makes sense or at the end. And again, this is the applicant workshop for the CORPO Dedicated Funds Program, state fiscal years 2026 to 2027. Just a quick intro for those of us in the room. My name is Mary Turner. I work with CORPO, Central Ohio Rural Planning Organization. Maria Shopper, our Transportation Planning Director, is likely going to join at some point this afternoon. Just do her intro quick. And then also in the room I have.
Yeah, I'm Tom Graham, Principal Planner here at MORPC, primarily working on the MORPC attributable funds process, but also providing some support here for the CORPO dedicated funds. And then
Hi, I'm Arjun. I am the intern under Tom for the Mobility and Development Department at MORPC.
So just a little background. I think everyone on the call is familiar, but a background on what CORPO is. CORPO is the Central Ohio Rural Planning Organization, as I mentioned. CORPO represents the 7 counties that are shown in green on the screen and the areas outside of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So that includes Fairfield, Madison, Marion, Morrow, Knox, Pickett, Union counties. If you'll notice on that map, Licking County has their own MPO, and then Franklin and Delaware are part of the MORPC MPO, along with parts of Union, Fairfield, and Madison counties. Just want to kind of lay that out so we know who is eligible when we're talking about these CORPO dedicated funds. CORPO is staffed by MORPC, myself, and my coworkers here at MORPC, and then is guided by our CORPO committee/board, which includes representatives from each of those 7 counties. And then we have our CORPO subcommittees in each of the 7 counties that engage a broader group of stakeholders. And then our boards and subcommittees together guide that transportation process for CORPO. A little background on this program. RTPOs, the Regional Transportation Planning Organizations, began in the state of Ohio in about 2013. CORPO became official in 2018 or 2019, depending on what you deem official, passing the long range plan or signing off of the governor. And then as part of the state's biennial transportation budget, the state suballocates a portion of their surface transportation block grant funds to be used by each of the 8 RTPOs to direct into their programs as they would like. Every 2 state fiscal years. So as part of the state's biennial budget for 2026 to 2027, they continued this suballocation of STBG funds for the RTPOs. These funds can be used for both capital and planning projects. A little background. Okay, so then this year, we're currently seeking funding applications for those funds, that suballocation of STBG funds. We will have around 2.4 million in funds allocated to us available for this 2026-2027 cycle. Our 2026-2027 award in the state's biennial budget, if you're curious, is about $850,000. Most of that balance that we have for this funding cycle is carryover from that 2024 to 2025 round. We'll be carrying forward about 1.5 million in funds to make that total program award available about 2.4 million for this round. The applications are open now and they are due on August 8th at 5 p.m. The application is available online on the CORPO webpage. If you go to the CORPO webpage, there's a couple buckets of information in green boxes for the long range plan, our safety action plan, our TIP, and then you'll see the dedicated funds green bucket. So if you go ahead and click on that, you'll find more information about the funding round, the policies managing the funds and that application link as well. I also have emailed that out, that link to the application. If you did not receive it, let me know, and I'll be sure to put a link in the meeting chat before the end of this meeting as well. If you don't find the link easily and you need assistance finding the application, please let me know and reach out. I'll be happy to help. And the Corpo webpage, you can get to it really quickly at www.morpc.org/Corpo. Overview of the schedule for this funding round. So our Corpo board adopted the Corpo dedicated funds policy at their meeting in May. We opened this application up on Monday, and then we're hosting that applicant workshop right now. That's that big green arrow. As I mentioned, applications must be completed online by 5 p.m. on August 8th. About a week after that, we'll notify you all as application sponsors of any errors or omissions on your application, or if we need more information. And then at the end of August, we will email the Corpo Fund Selection Committee an overview of the applications received and our result of our staff evaluations. We'll have the Corpo Fund Selection Committee meet in early September, September 4th. Then we'll go into a public comment period on the draft list of selected projects for a month from September to October. And then on November 3rd, we will meet with the Corpo board or committee to make the final recommendations and approving of funding commitments. So if you're curious about the timeline of when you would have access to these funds if you were awarded, that would be after that November 3rd date is when we'll have opportunity to program those and move those forward. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Tom real quick to talk about some key information.
Yeah.
If you want those slides.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and talk through just the basics of project eligibility so that everyone can understand what types of projects and which applicants are eligible to apply. To start off, eligible sponsors are going to include any public agency, though non-public entities can indirectly sponsor, but public agencies are the ones who will need to be the primary sponsor on applications. Generally, eligible roadways, those are going to need to be on the federal aid system. So outside of the urbanized area, that's going to be major collectors and above. In urbanized areas, minor collectors are also eligible. Worth noting though, all bridges are eligible. So if you are looking at a project that's not on the federal aid system, and it includes a bridge, those bridge components could still be eligible for Corpo dedicated funding. In terms of eligible costs, Corpo dedicated funding does fund all phases of a project. Everything is eligible. So preliminary engineering, detailed design, right of way, and construction phases. And generally, these funds do require a 20% local match. So they operate with that 80% federal participation. As we look towards eligible activities, funds can be used for the construction, expansion, reconstruction, preliminary engineering right away, or preservation of roads and bridges on any public road. Additionally, transit is an eligible project type that can be primarily focused on capital costs. So whether that be vehicle purchases or construction of new capital facilities. And then bicycle and pedestrian facilities are also eligible. So new shared use paths or trails, as well as sidewalk expansion projects are eligible activities. The STBG program does offer a wide range of eligibility for other transportation related projects. So if you do have a project type that you're unsure of the eligibility of and you're interested in applying, please do reach out to us and we'd be happy to dig through some of the more edge case eligibility scenarios with you. Importantly, though, we do need to see projects identified on the Corpo Transportation Plan or the CTP. So that's either going to be eligible, it's either going to need to be directly listed on that list of projects or more generally included in the goals and objectives of the CTP. Again, if you have a question about whether or not your project is on the CTP, please reach out to Mary or myself and we'd be happy to provide that additional clarification. This slide shows you all of the different eligible project types. We tried to explain that, but in the end, there are a lot of different project types that are eligible for surface transportation block grant funding. And the corporate dedicated funds process does not significantly restrict any of the eligibility that you would get through the STBG program. So all of these project types listed are expressly eligible for CORPO dedicated funds. And then important to note, again, before I move on, any questions about eligibility, we can take those during the workshop, or if you want to reach out to us afterwards, please don't hesitate to do so. I will also point out, though, these are federal funds. So if you are awarded funds via the CORPO dedicated funds process, you will be required to adhere to ODOT's project development process or ODOT's local public agency or LPA process. So this is ensuring that projects are developed in adherence with all federal requirements, including procurement of consultants and design firms, as well as following the regulations set forth in NEPA, the Historic Preservation Act, as well as the ADA and Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Act. So I know oftentimes it can be daunting to deal with the extra federal requirements that come along with this funding source. So again, if you have concerns in advance of reaching out, please do communicate that with us, and we'd be happy to also put you in contact with the folks at ODOT who would be the ones overseeing these processes once projects are funded. So I'll take a quick moment there to see if there are any questions on eligibility or the federal requirements that come along with this funding source before I turn it back over to Mary.
Feel free to put any questions you have in the chat or just come off mute and ask them. Give it
Hey,
about
everyone.
2 minutes and then I'll move on. I see Mike's unmuted, perhaps.
I have a quick question. You're probably going to get to this, though. It's also really weird to be on this end of this. So hi.
Sorry,
all
Mike,
you
1
folks.
second. I'm having a little volume issue.
It's fine. You can just turn it.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, I was just going to say hi to everyone. It's weird to be on this side of the aisle, but it's good to see you. I have a question about the application. So
Okay.
if the primary function is or purpose is intersection modification, but we're also adding additional elements to it, is there any objection to them selecting other and then just filling out that detail in the other section? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Mike, that's fine. Sorry, having mic issues.
That's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we didn't have to select a primary in there and that we could just kind of write it out.
No, that's fine. You can put other and then we can recategorize it when we're going through the evaluation to clarify what it is.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And that goes for anyone else. If you have multiple primary project types, you know, if you can categorize it as one of the primary project types in the application, that would be great. And then add additional secondary information in the scope if you need to. But if none of them fits, feel free to select other, write out information about your project, primary types in the scope. And, you know, we can use that discretion as we review your application on the back end to figure out what kind of project we're looking at. Okay, any other questions? Okay, great. And then should probably just leave it on here. Okay. Okay, the next steps here, I'm going to walk through the application process. Starting with generally talking about how the evaluation goes. So when you apply for this funding program, we'll receive your applications by the August 8th deadline. The process that we use to evaluate your applications for our internal staff evaluation is a series of questions that you're answering in the application. The questions are asked in the application form, and those questions are reflective of the goals and objectives that are part of the CORPO Transportation Plan, the 2023 to 2050 CORPO Transportation Plan. These are also outlined in that Policies for Managing CORPO Dedicated Funds document that you can reference right there that shows you what policies and objectives we're using to evaluate each of the applications. I will talk about the questions that we ask in the application when we walk through the form. But generally, the questions ask how your project will advance the 6 goals as outlined in the CTP. The 6 goals, as I mentioned, were adopted with that update in 2023 to 2050 CTP. Mainly what we're getting at here is figuring out how your project is advancing that vision that we put forth for the region with our long-range transportation plan. I will say before I get into the meat of the application and those questions, we've had a lot of comments in the past about some of the project types are primarily one project type. So they're primarily safety or primarily preservation. So that's not necessarily straightforward to answer all 6 of the questions types related to 6 of the goals in the transportation plan. That's fine. If your project is primarily a preservation or safety activity, we will note that in our evaluation. And when we're evaluating projects, like I'll talk about a little bit later on, we're generally evaluating based on all the other projects that have been submitted. So your ranking will reflect not, a 0 for that category or something like that. You'll be ranked relative to the other projects, and that'll be taken into consideration. So as I mentioned, we do an initial evaluation once we receive your applications and do an initial scoring, quantitative and qualitative measures. All of the applications will be scored on a 10-point scale related to each of the 6 goals and the 6 questions that you're answering. And then weights are applied for each goal. So I would also mention here, if you look at the weight on the right side of the screen related to each of the goals, when we adopted this transportation plan, and then again, when we adopted the updated policies for managing CORPO dedicated funds, preservation and safety continue to be priorities as well as regional collaboration. So those receive a higher weight. So I would point out too, I know there's been concern in the past, if you have a preservation or safety or collaboration application, and it doesn't score elsewhere, your score is going to be lower. That weight should also help advance that. And again, our staff evaluation is reflective of our initial view, but once we meet with that CORPO Fund Selection Committee and put forth our staff evaluation, usually there's discussion around other factors that might advance certain projects over the others. This is just kind of that initial staff evaluation. So if you have any questions on that process, or if you're going through and you're answering the questions in your application related to a specific goal that you don't think is applicable to your project, feel free to reach out and talk more about that with us, and we can help you guide through that portion of the application. Once we do this evaluation, we'll share that with the CORPO Fund Selection Committee. They'll review, we'll come up with a scheduled program of projects that they're comfortable with. That'll go to public comment period. And then we'll ultimately share this evaluation with the CORPO board in November to make that final recommendation on funding. I've mentioned the CORPO Fund Selection Committee a couple times just to clarify what that is. The CORPO Fund Selection Committee is made up of our CORPO board members, so those representatives from each of the 7 counties, as well as any project sponsor in applying for funding. This is intended to be a transparent process. Every applicant sponsor has a seat on that Fund Selection Committee, so you'll all be aware of the scoring process and how your project compared to other submitted projects. And then ultimately, this will lead to the recommendation for the awarding of funds by the CORPO board in November. Okay. Moving on to the application now. As I mentioned, the application is available on the CORPO webpage, www.morpc.org/CORPO. When you get to that CORPO dedicated funds page, this here on the right-hand side of the screen is what you'll see. This link here takes you for the policies for managing CORPO dedicated funds, so you can dive further into eligible agencies, eligible project types, what the process is for managing your funds if awarded. And then that Appendix A has a PDF copy of the application as well, if you want a PDF copy before you go into the online version. And I realized I thought I switched out my photo, but instead of coming on Monday, July 7th, that now says click for application here at that second big green arrow, you'll find that. And then this bottom piece is the link to the workshop. After today, that will be a link to the recording of this workshop and the slides if you want to review that as well. Okay, So the application is an online form. You do have the ability to save and resume as you go through. You also have the ability to add attachments. While you're in the application, you'll be able to view external links, anything like that. It's not going to lock you into the one window. So you can have multiple windows open, you know, minimize, reopen, whatever. You should be still able to access your application. This is a view of the introduction page to the online application form. Clicking the link on the corporate webpage takes you to that this welcome page. The asterisks in this welcome page indicate required, in this welcome page and throughout the application indicate required fields that need to be submitted. This welcome page also has information about how to save and resume. So you are able to save and resume and continue your application, but it's a little bit of a different process. So you'll be able to save a partially complete application by capturing and saving the link or hitting the option to have a link emailed to you. So you'll either copy it from your browser and save it somewhere or hit the option to have the link emailed to you to save it to resume later. And then when you're ready to revisit the application, you'll click that link in your email or you'll copy paste that link into your browser and it'll reload the portions of the applications you've already completed. I will note though, if you do choose to save and resume and you've already uploaded attachments, the added attachments do not save. So you should go ahead and make sure you add those attachments as the last step of your process. If you have any issues adding attachments as well, there is a file size limit, so you can always send them in an email to me or to the CORPO email if you have any issues uploading your attachments, or give me a call if you can't send them via email. If they're too big, we'll figure out a way to get your attachments in. Don't worry about that. Please use the attachments to provide any project information that you have available that will be helpful in understanding the project and evaluating the project. The application provides a lot of cost information, timeline information, and all of your answers to the goals questions. But other than the kind of scope box, it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of space to put in more project information. So if you have, you know, maps or any kind of already drawn up plans that you want to include with your application, please feel free to use that attachment link to add it. Or if you have more extensive scope information, you can do that as well. The first part of your application just captured your sponsoring agency information. So it'll be your address, contact person, contact information. Pretty straightforward. The next portion captures your project information. So this is where you'll put in the title of your project. If you already have, you know, it's escaping me, PID for your project and you want to use that in the title, that's very helpful for me to find more project information. If you don't, that's fine. If you can get kind of specific in the location of your project, that would be great. In the project title makes it very easy for me to find your application information when we're reviewing these. The project type is a drop down of available project types. As Mike mentioned, you can kind of only pick one primary project type. So pick your primary if possible. And then if there's more than one thing that categorizes your project, please feel free to build on that in the project scope. And we can adjust that when we're evaluating and read about your project as well. And then the facility name as applicable, straightforward for that. Oh, no, I have a typo on the screen. But yeah, as I mentioned, if you already have a PID, if you could put it in the title and this location, great. That CORPO CTP ID, that is the ID number that your project is assigned if it's included in the CORPO CTP. If you need help finding that number, please let me know. The 2023 to 2050 CORPO Transportation Plan is also available on the CORPO webpage. And then we do have appendices now available on the CORPO webpage that break out your county project list by county. So you have a labeled appendice with your county. So instead of having to sort through all the project types to find your project, hopefully you can find it quickly by your county. But if it still isn't something that you're able to find, but you know it's in there, let me know. I can help you find it. This text box is larger too, because as Tom mentioned, if your project isn't directly listed as a line item in the project list in the CTP, but it's still furthering the goals or objectives of the CTP, this is your space to tell us how your project is doing that, is moving forward, is related to what's already in that CORPO Transportation Plan vision. And then down lower, you have just your project termini, your lengths, limits, and scope. All of these text boxes will expand as you type. You're not on a character limit. So if you have a lot of information to add in there, don't worry about character limit. It should all fit. They will get bigger. The next section is on project costs. You can use ODOT's preliminary cost estimating tool. There's a link available right in the application. If you click that link, it should open in a separate window, so you don't have to worry about it closing out your application. On your application, you can enter the costs of your project phases either as percentages or dollar amounts. And then I have a little bit more to say on this. So you can select in the application if you want to add as percentage or dollar amounts, and the form will do the math. So if you add them as dollars, it'll show you what percent of your project cost that is. If you add them as percents, it'll show you how many dollars that is. You can pick either one. If you do fill in one side, but then decide that you want to fill out the other methods. So say you started entering as dollars, but then you switch and you say, oh, I actually want to do this as percentages. So I know exactly how much 80% of my project cost is. You can do that and change method, but first go back and remove the other information. It won't automatically delete or remove for you. So you'll have unmatching amounts in there. So just pick one or the other. If you switch, delete everything, move to the other one. Next page. So as project costs information is broken out by phases, so you'll have a couple different pages of entering project costs for all of your phases as applicable. And then another page of project cost information. Next, you'll get to the project schedule information. Follow the application steps here. The project schedule information is important. We've talked a lot about when we need to spend these funds down. We'd really like to make it a goal to encumber or spend the funds more quickly so that in future rounds of this program, we have more sway in the state legislature to get more funds for our RTPO capital program. So it's important to understand the timeline that these projects are on. So we know, it might be something that the CORPO Fund Selection Committee or the CORPO Board looks for, prioritizing some projects that are moving forward more quickly. And then again, continuing on scheduling information, similar to cost, this is broken down by phase. So you'll just be breaking, so that's why it's several pages. And just a reminder, as you do fill this out, each time you save and resume, you'll be sent an email from the system, or you can save that link to make sure you can revisit to the completed portions of your application. Okay, the next portion of your application is where we get into the evaluation questions. As mentioned previously, the intent of the evaluation is to align these projects with the goals and objectives outlined in that CORPO transportation plan. So the application goes through each goal and asks questions about how the project relates to each of the goals. We understand that each project might not be applicable to all goals, but I'm happy to talk through how your project might be applicable to the goals and objectives with you as well. If you need assistance with any data to answer these questions as well, please reach out. We would be happy to provide that information to you. And then I'm just going to kind of go through these goals quickly, because as I mentioned, they do relate to each of the 6 goals in the transportation plan. So the first 2 questions relate to the preservation goal, to preserve and maintain the existing transportation system in a state of good repair. So this question is asking you how your application furthers the state of good repair for roads and bridges or pavement quality. The next questions are related to a safe transportation system for all users. So we'll be asking about how your application advances safety for all roadway users. When we do our staff evaluation, we will do a safety evaluation of each of the projects and pull crash data and fatal and serious injury crashes in your project area as well. So just a note that we'll be pulling this information internally as well for evaluating your projects. The next 3 questions relate to the goal for accessibility and mobility for all users. So this project talks about these questions talk about how your project improves accessibility for all modes of transportation. The next three questions relate to the goal for an integrated, connected, and coordinated transportation system. Generally, these questions are furthering how you will increase modal connectivity, increase better connect other corporal communities with your community. And then this is also a spot that in the past, we've had a lot of projects detail what extensive public outreach they've done or community engagement related to their project. In that first box there, feel free to add that information as well. The next goal and the next set of questions are related to the goal for a collaborative and focused approach to supporting economic vitality. These questions get at if your project will improve freight facilities, help develop multi-purpose corridors, or increase access to employment areas or sites. And I believe this is the last of the 6. This question relates to how your project will, these questions relate to how your project will preserve and enhance environmental resources and sustainability through the transportation system. So is your project going to increase the use of non-single occupancy vehicles or enhance the environment other ways as well?
On this final goal, I will just point out for that second question, this is always a good point, area. If your project does have any stormwater components or improvements, it's always a good spot to include that.
Okay, I'm going to move on. If there are any questions on the meat of those evaluation questions that are part of your application, please feel free to speak up now before I move on to the last bit of the application here. The last page here is on your application submittal. That additional information upload that we mentioned at the beginning is on this last page because, as I mentioned, when you save and resume, it won't re-add anything that you uploaded. So we put it at the end so that you remember to do this at the end. So if you won't lose it, if you save and resume later. You can use this, as I mentioned, to upload any other project information that you have, as well as if you have supporting data. If you've got letters of support from community agencies or from your local jurisdiction that you want to include, please do that here. And then that last piece there is where you'll put your authorized signature with your application. You'll need to click that link that's in that authorized signature box. It will download the signature page for you. And then you'll need to complete that signature page and reattach at that upload area, which is right below the authorized signature gray box there. Once that is done and your authorized signature upload is completed, you'll be able to hit submit on the bottom right corner for your application. This is just a view of what that authorized signature page looks like. So it's just asking that you are authorized on the behalf of the sponsoring agency to request and accept financial assistance from CORPO, and all representations are part of this application are true and correct. So you'll fill out name, date, and title, and sign that and re-upload to submit your application. And then just a quick reminder on what the project evaluation process looks like. I'm going to kind of walk through exactly what we're looking at with you here. So based on those questions that you answered with your application, we'll review all those and apply that scoring criteria I talked about. So that 1 to 10 scale for each of those 6 goals to the applications that are applying for new funding commitments. And then we'll submit the collected information about each application as well as our evaluation scores to the CORPO Fund Selection Committee for review and comment. The CORPO Fund Selection Committee, so that's our CORPO board again, as well as all the sponsoring agencies that are applying for funds, will meet and make a general recommendation for the new funding commitments that they see fit for this 2026 to 2027 round. From there, we'll go into the public comment period, and then application schedules and costs will be endorsed by the CORPO board and then incorporated into the statewide transportation improvement program, the STIP. for funding and moving forward. Okay, did I have anything else? No, I just moved my slides too quick to say on that. Okay, and then this is my last slide, just a reminder of the schedule. We've just completed that applicant workshop now, once we finish wrapping up and answering any questions that you have. So just a reminder, the applications are due online by 5 p.m. on August 8th. Then we'll reach out to you to talk about any errors or omissions on your application a week later. The Corporate Fund Selection Committee will meet in September. And then we'll have that public comment period. And again, your final awards would happen in November, the first Monday in November, November 3rd. Okay, I will go ahead and open the floor for any questions that you all have. If you have project activities you want to talk about, find out if they might be eligible, you can use this time now or give me a call or an email later as well.